Aloha and welcome back to my channel. This is my first ever wrap-up, and do I have a lot of books for you? Aloha and welcome back to my channel, the Baby Boomer Booktuber with me, Marilyn Maya. And today is my first ever wrap-up. It's the September wrap-up, but actually it started a little before September because I started my channel on my 70th birthday in August. So before we start, I just wanted to say that this is my opinion of these books. Some of these books have been very highly recommended and reviewed, and maybe I didn't like them as much, but that's okay because we all have our different tastes. Also, I might have to sit down after a few books because I did some what I call emotional exercise, and I'll explain that later. But first, the theme of this wrap-up, beside my first ever wrap-up, is a term that I found in one of my favorite books last year, which was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And it's called Bildungsroman. And I have the meaning of, it's a literary meaning. It's a journey. Sometimes it's a physical journey, but more often it's a psychological or spiritual journey of discovery, a struggle for identity, a societal conflict, and a loss of innocence, or what we call more commonly a coming-of-age story. And the reason that I heard this term in her book, and I had never heard of it before, so I found out that a lot of these books are coming-of-age stories in some way, shape, or form. Let's start with my only 5-star read, and it's part of my Latinx-a-thon that I took part in for the TBR, and it's Down These Mean Streets by Piri Thomas. Now, I read this book, which is a new cover because it's the 30th anniversary of him writing the book. I read this book in 1968. I think he had just written it. And I love it. I loved it. I read it. I started reading it again to get the feeling for it. And it's so many things that are relevant in today's society. First of all, it's a lyrical memoir. And I write memoir and I read memoir, and I love lyrical memoirs. To compare another book that's a lyrical memoir, I heard about and also have on my Latinx TBR, The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I haven't gotten it yet from the library, but I heard that it's similar. It's sort of like a millennium or younger take on a lyrical memoir. And this book is started in 1940s in Harlem. And there's a lot of jazzy, beatnik type language for the lyricism. And there's also a lot of racial stuff and colorism and things that reminded me of my own bringing up, even though I'm not Afro-Caribbean like Piri is. He went through an identity crisis growing up, being thought of as black, which he was. He was Afro-Caribbean, but there wasn't such a thing. We called ourselves Spanish back then. that was what we called ourselves. And he was morenito, which is a dark-skinned Puerto Rican, and I think he was half Cuban as well. And in this book, he starts out as a young boy trying to prove himself as being Puerto Rican, and not being black, and not appreciating his blackness because his family didn't accept him, accept their racial identity. So how could he, right? So he goes through this book and he starts to really go down a rabbit hole of bad stuff. But he starts in Spanish Harlem in the 40s, and I think he's about 12 when he starts. I'm going to read the first line of it because it's so beautiful. But he starts street fights, and a lot of it is about his identity as being Puerto Rican, which I can really relate to because I had the opposite identity problem, being a white Puerto Rican. And my father was a white Puerto Rican, but my grandmother was a black Puerto Rican. But I had the dubious, and it was something that was thought of at the time as being a white blonde Puerto Rican. You were given more, in the Puerto Rican community there was colorism, and I was always called Rubia, the Rubia, which means the blondie. And he had the opposite problem. But I also went through a cultural identity as well, of not being thought of as Puerto Rican, and I think that's what he's going through, but in a very racial way, because his family moves to Long Island, and he hates it there. And I can understand that because my boyfriend Jackson didn't like Long Island either. So I don't know what's wrong with Long Island, but they both didn't like Long Island. So down these mean streets is his coming of age. And all of those things that I said about buildings Roman applies. He goes on a journey. In fact, he ends up in prison after shooting a cop. And this is not the end of the story, but it's really the beginning, because he wrote another book after this, and I can't remember the name of it now. But I give this 5 big stars, and I think anyone who's interested in racial identity, in reading diverse books. He died a few years ago, and they made this beautiful cover, I think, as his anniversary edition. And I bought it because I don't know what happened to my other book. And I'm going to read from the first page so you can get an idea of what you're in for, what wonderful writing you're in for. And it's in the prologue. Yeah, want to know how many times I've stood on a rooftop and yelled to anybody? Hey world, here I am. Hello world, this is Petey. That's me. I want to tell you I'm here, you bunch of mother jumpers. I'm here, and I want recognition, whatever that motherfucking word means. Anyway, I don't like to say bad words on video. I guess I'm old-fashioned that way. But his whole prologue goes into his identity as being a man, coming of age as a man. And I know that's not as popular right now because men always had all the power, but black men don't have the power. So I suggest that you read Down These Mean Streets, a big 5-star for me. Okay, now this book is All the Birds Singing by Evie Wild. I read about this on another booktuber's channel, and I think it's Read with Leanne, but I'll have the information down in the description box. And I'm also going to read the first few words, first sentences of this, because this got a very good review. It won many, many prizes. And personally, I couldn't relate to it, even though I also went on a similar journey. I mean, not as drastic as she did. And like I said about Bildungsroman, somebody referred this to as a reverse Bildungsroman, because she starts out as an adult and it's told in two different timelines, which is, I really love experimental writing. And as I mentioned, In the Dream House was also a book that had experimental writing using metaphors, and I think I talked about this in a prior video. And this book I should have liked better. We're introduced to Jake, and she's on an unnamed island on the off of the UK, off of Britain, that we're never told what that island is. I thought it was Scotland, actually, because they have a lot of Scottish words. And she has a sheep farm, and a lot of strange things happen. And in the second timeline, we're going backwards from what happened to her from not from childhood to this point, but from the point that this starts back to what happened in the beginning of her life, which is very, very unusual and brilliant, actually. And I really enjoyed part of this book. It's also lyrical, very lyrical and descriptive. The problem I had with this book was that I couldn't relate to Jake at all. And I was thinking, but I've seen sheep being sheared on. I was actually on the Isle of Mull once, and I should have been able to relate more to it. But yet, I couldn't relate to it, and I think it's because she had done something terrible in her past. And her whole attitude was because of this. And we're told that she had scars on her back. We're told this over and over again as a foreshadowing. I think they went a little bit too, I think the author went a little bit too far in describing that. But a lot happens, and the ending was not satisfying to a lot of reviewers, but they said the book was wonderful. Now I'll read the first chapter, and I'm going to sit down now because I think that's enough for standing. When I walked 2 miles yesterday, like I said, emotional walking. Okay, so, and this kind of shows you how wonderful her writing is. And I think that I gave this 4.5 stars. Well, between 4 and 4.5. Another sheep mangled and bled out, her innards not yet crusting, and the vapors rising from her like a steamed pudding. Crows, their beaks shining, strutting and rasping, and when I waved my stick, they flew to the trees and watched, flaring out their wings, singing, if you can call that. I shoved my boot in Dog's face to stop him from taking a string of her away with him as a souvenir. And he kept close by my side as I wheeled the carcass out of the field and down into the wool shed. So that's pretty, it's pretty violent right there. And the book has a lot of violence. I have to let you know that. And there's a lot of hinting, foreshadowing that she did something terrible or something terrible happened to her. And I was thinking, you know, in my mind, she must have been abused as a child or something. And she becomes a prostitute for a short period of time and lives with another girl. And I don't want to make any spoilers, but there's a lot of referring to birds birds in Australia, which was where the character had come from, where the terrible thing happened, and birds in this sheep farm off the coast of Britain. And all of this, well, this might have been the Isle of Mull for all I know. But anyway, what I thought of this book was that it kept me reading. The ending had a very, it wasn't clear, and it almost went into magical realism, which kind of bugged me because the whole story didn't have any, well, it sort of did have some magical realism, but you thought it would have been worked out. Anyway, 4 to 4.5 stars, but I know a lot of you will love this book. Okay. My next book is a Pulitzer Prize winner, so I was expecting a lot, and I did get a lot, but it wasn't a 5-star read for me. I saw this all over BookTube, and I think it's because I don't read much what they call women's fiction. Not that this is women's fiction, but it's fiction and it's about a woman. Anyway, the book is Olive Kitteridge, and I have to say it's a 4-star for me. What keeps it from being a 5-star is my personal preference that I don't like short stories. I came into it not knowing that it was written in a short story format. And anyway, let me just tell you a little bit about it. Olive Kitteridge is a very complicated woman, and it tells her life from about the time she's like in her 50s to 70s, and maybe even a little before that in some of the stories. And she has some emotional issues. What I think she has, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think she has explosive anger disorder. And I knew a lot of people in my life who have had that, so it jumped out at me. And she is very short with people. She was a teacher, and she's retired now. And she has a very wonderful husband who's in love with her, but she's very dismissive of him. And you feel so sorry for poor Henry in the beginning and even in the end. And she goes on a journey as well. It's not as blatant a journey as in Perry Thomas's book, but it's still a journey. But what I loved about this book and what makes it a 4 is the writing. The writing is spectacular. At the end, the last story, I got chills just by the writing alone. Not so much what happened. This is written really beautifully. And there's a lot of characters in the book, stories, and sometimes Olive Kitteridge makes an appearance at these different stories. So when I first read the first chapter, I was really enjoying it, and then I put it down and I'm saying, what is this? The second chapter is telling people I don't even know, and it's like a different book. And then I realized that it's stories, and Olive does come in different parts of the story. And some of the people's stories I didn't like as much as others. So it's like any short story collection, except that Olive is the mainstay of the book. She has a son who we find out is very dismissive of her, as she is to her husband. And she loves him very much, but there's some history that we learn as the book goes on. And we love her, we don't love her. She wants to change, but she's can't deal with people. She's prickly, and it's really a wonderful concept. But what kept me from giving it 5 stars, like I said, is not only the short story, and some of the stories are better than other stories, but it's also that I felt, as a survivor of abuse from a parent, I couldn't empathize with her as much as I wanted to, as much as other readers have, because my mother also had an explosive anger problem. And you see throughout how people suffered. But she does go on a journey. Sometimes it's too late, you know. Another thing I didn't like about the book was a personal preference, and that is it's a lot about people getting old and sick and dying, and, you know, me being 70, I really don't want to read so much about that kind of life. I want to read about life, not so much death. And there's a lot of death that happens here, a lot of suffering, a lot of bad stuff. But there's so much good in it. I mean, the writing, like I said, I can't keep on telling you. As a writer myself, I mean, this woman, Elizabeth Strout, is a wonderful writer. That's why she won the Pulitzer Prize. And I read, at the end, there is a question and answer with her. And she asked why she wrote the book in this manner, as short stories instead of a novel. And she said she didn't think that the readers would be able to take Olive for the whole book because she's so prickly and so, you know, capricious. But anyway, I suggest you read this book. I really think some people will love it more than others, more than I did. But I still, a solid 4 for me. The next book I won't talk about too much because I talked about it a lot during my first haul, and that is The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith, who's much better known for her thrillers as the talented Mr. Ripley. And I was going to give it 5 stars actually, until I read a biography about Patricia Highsmith and how she wasn't really a nice person. And I don't know why, but that colored my feeling about the book. It changed the way I felt about it a little bit. But basically, the story is perfect. To me, it's a 5-star read, and I'm giving it 4 stars, but I can understand how other people would give it a 5-star read. And basically, it's about 2 queer women. In the beginning, I don't even know if they know they're queer yet. One woman is getting a divorce. The other girl, Therese, is working in a department store, and she's very young and innocent. And they meet, and if you saw the movie, what is her name? Carol, that's the name. If you saw the movie Carol, Carol is the divorcee. And Carol and Therese go on a journey together, and they fall in love. But there's so much more to it than that. And what I liked about it is also how this is a lesbian cult classic, I'm told. And what I liked about it that I didn't mention the first time is that it sort of shows how women's role in society has changed. And they bring up that the older woman, who's Carol, she has a child, and she's not really the typical motherly mother. And I won't tell you how it ends, but it gives it must have been really ahead of its time when it comes to thinking of how mothers don't have to be all in one. And yet we still think of mothers as that way. I'm thinking of a television program that I watch called The 90-Day Fiancé. And there's a woman, I won't say her name, but she's being portrayed as a bad mother because she left her children back in Brazil. And if you watch the show, I'm sure you'll know who I'm talking about. But not every woman who has children, for whatever reason they decide to have children, are fit to be mothers, and that's okay. And in this book, they hint at it a little bit, and I like that because this was written really a long time ago. So I suggest you read this book, The Price of Salt. I think the title has something to do, has a biblical reference or a poetic reference, but I'm still not sure what it is. Okay, My next book is a popular one on BookTube, Ruth Ware, The Turn of the Key. I have a complicated relationship with Ruth Ware. I love her writing. All right, love is too big a word for it. I very much like her writing. It's interesting, but her endings turned me off all the time. This one, she did a little bit better, or she tried. She's learning, but I still did not like the end of it. It makes you go beyond belief. I mean, the ending to this was stretching a lot of things, let's put it that way. But the story itself, about what we think is a woman who doesn't have any money, and she sees an advertisement for to be a nanny, and the nanny, the job it's earning a lot of money, and it's in a beautiful house, and in the country or in Scotland, I can't remember, I think it's in Scotland, and a lot of things go wrong, as is wont to happen in books like this. So I won't go much into it because a lot of people know the story to this. I'll just say that I liked it better than her other books. I found that I was more engrossed in it, and I was feeling the main character and her relationships and her inner thoughts until things went off the rail, and then I kind of was, okay, here we go again. But it didn't go that bad. I mean, well, the ending did, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm sure people that love it really love it. People that don't love it won't love it. I'm in the middle. Having read a few Ruth Ware, I read all of her books except for Mrs. Westaway, which I'm planning to read. I'm not going to read her latest book because one by one, because I've heard really bad things about it, and it seems like sort of a rip-off of Agatha Christie, which I don't like. But right now I'm talking of Turn of the Key, and I said I'll say it's readable. It's a 4-star read, which is more than I've ever thought that I would give a Ruth Ware book. So I say read it and make up your own mind. My next book that I'm going to briefly talk about is also part of the Latinx-a-thon, and it's the plays of Josephina Niggli. I say Josefina instead of Josephina, even though she wasn't technically, well, she wasn't Mexican. She was born in Mexico with Anglo parents. But I feel she has a very complicated relationship, like I said before, with the Mexican culture. And I think she was finally accepted in some ways. And they say it's not a Latina book so much as it says recovered landmarks of Latino literature, because she writes about Mexican Pueblo life. And the reason I bought this new, well, I don't know if it's new, looks new, and I had to go all the way to the University of Wisconsin because I was in a play back when I was 15 called Soldadera, and I wanted to read it. It's in her plays, which is, it says the plays of Josefina Niggli, but actually it also has her poetry, which is really, I really enjoyed her poetry. But I haven't read it all because it's not a book that you read from beginning to end. But it tells about her life and her interest in the Mexican Revolution and Pancho Villa. And of course she spoke Spanish. So a lot of people think it's sort of cultural misappropriation to have her thought of as an icon of Latino or Mexican literature. But I think when you're so close to a culture, that the culture starts accepting you and you're born in the place, then it's up to the people, the Mexican people, not me. I'm not Mexican. I'm Latina, but I'm not Mexican. So it's not up to me to accept her, but up to the Mexican people if they're going to accept her as an icon of Latino literature or not. But I really enjoy her plays, and I think that she doesn't hold back on what she thought of Pancho Villa. And there's a lot of women, like in Soldadera, one of the plays in here, there's a lot of women banding together against, not against men, so to speak, but against politics or to make a better world, which I think is sort of happening now. Women coming together in whatever form of politics they believe in. And I like that. I like women friendships. So that's the plays of Josephina Niggli. I gave it a 4.5. Okay, my next book I talked about before, but I don't think I gave it full attention that it deserves. It's called Life Drawing for Beginners by Rosen Meany, and I think I'm saying the name wrong this time. I think I said it right the last time. But anyway, it's about a 38-year-old woman who starts a class for life drawing. In other words, they're going to draw, the people that meet are going to draw a naked female, and they don't know each other in the beginning, and they all go through what I was talking about, which is a life change. So with the life drawing, she's talking about how people change when they meet each other, and this 38-year-old woman she's very unusual in that she loves colors, and she's overweight, and people think she's a little strange for dressing in different colors. And as a woman who, I used to be very, very overweight, whatever very, very means. I'm 5 feet and I was almost 200 pounds, so I was a big lady. And people have expectations when you're bigger that you can't wear this or do this. And she loved her colors. And she was also a very interesting person, as are all of the people that we meet in this book. And I have to say, I'll give it 4 stars because I read it interestingly from beginning to end, which I don't always do. So I must have liked it, whether it be called women's fiction or a slow book. It's very Irish, it's very old-fashioned, but I liked it. I really liked it. So, but you have to understand that I'm just getting into reading this kind of fiction. I usually have, in my recent past, have read more mysteries, thrillers, and nonfiction. So getting into a slower book maybe made me like it less. But I think I'm going to read the one she did before, the book she did before, which is called Semi-Sweet. It sounds very cute. And I think I'm going to read that. Okay. The next 2 books I gave 4.5 stars to. And I talked about them in my prior video, so I won't go into them too much. They're mysteries. They're by Josephine Tey, who's considered like a rival to Agatha Christie. But she writes more of a character-based books rather than puzzle plots. Anyway, I thought it was funny because when I was nervous when I first started this channel, and I said, aren't these covers beautiful? And I was talking about the well, I didn't talk about the candle, but the ocean, and these are new Scribner paperback fiction books. And I said, I didn't even say that there's a candle and there's an ocean, but it's really pretty. And when I got to this book, I said, The Franchise Affair, I should say their names. One is The Franchise Affair and one is called A Shilling for Candles. And they're both really good books. But I said, and look at this cover. There's a bed. And what I wanted to say is there's a woman who looked like she's dead on a bed. But anyway, I was nervous. But these books are I suggest you read them if you're into mysteries at all, because they're different. The reason I didn't give them 5 stars is because there's a lot of slang from the 1930s that I had a hard time with. So it's kind of slow in the beginning, but the thoughts and the mental illness aspects of some of these characters were really ahead of its time. So as I am really champion to end mental illness, the stigma against the mentally ill, I felt that it was great to see somebody who was writing about this way long ago. Okay, now that's it for my books that I read, my wrap-up. But I do have a DNF, and unfortunately it was one from my Latinx-a-thon that I really wanted to read, and it's a library book, so I can't say it's a DNF forever, but it's called Brazilian Bombshell, and it's a biography of Carmen Miranda, who was a Brazilian, actually she was Portuguese, but she was a Brazilian movie star in the 30s, and I used to see her movies. She was called the lady with the tutti frutti hat, because she always wore hats with like fruits in them, and she was actually a wonderful samba singer too. And the person who I don't know if she translated it, I think she did, her name is Martha Gil Monteiro, and I think she's either Brazilian or Portuguese, but I'm not sure. But the problem I had reading this book is that it's an exhaustive biography, and I didn't really want to know so much about Carmen Miranda that I thought I did. So I think I'm going to put this on the side as a DNF for now. The next book that I DNF'd for sure is, and I'm kind of ashamed about it, it's called A Separate Peace by John Knowles, and I know it was made into a movie. I just could not get into it. It's has 2 boys who meet at a private boarding school, and I tried my best. I know it's supposed to be an important book, and if you liked it, please tell me in the comments why you liked it and why I should read it or not DNF it, because I'm open to suggestions. Maybe DNF is a fantasy book, but I only read a few pages of it, and it's called Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan, and it has a great review history on BookTube. I just don't read fantasies anymore, and when I read the first page where they're explaining the magic system or the world building, I started feeling, oh no, I don't know if I can go into this, but I'm still going to try. So I haven't DNF'd it for good. And I just wanted to mention that I'm rereading The Daughter of Time, and The Daughter of Time, I thought I read it and I thought I loved it, and a lot of people loved it, but as I'm rereading it, I'm thinking I don't remember it, but that's, could be that I read it when I was in my 20s. So and I'm not liking it that as much as I thought I would, as much as everybody else does here on BookTube. So please tell me what you liked about it and why I should continue rereading it or reading it. I really would appreciate that. And I'm going to end with what I was talking about in the beginning, which is emotional exercise. I went to the doctor recently, and they mentioned that I have to go in for a test for PAD, peripheral artery disease, which I don't think I have, but came out in a small test that a visiting nurse gave me, and I have. So I was very upset, and I heard that there's such a thing as angry jogging. I haven't jogged for like 30-40 years, but that's when you're angry at something, or and you jog it out, or you run to get rid of your emotion. So I ended up emotionally walking, and I walked for 2 miles, which is a lot for me because I have arthritis, severe hip arthritis, which prevents me from standing for long periods of time. But I wanted to know, and you can tell me in the comments if you heard of this emotional exercise where you're trying to burn off stuff instead of working it out and trying to come to a more logical conclusion. Because even if I do have this PAD, it's not the end of the world. But because I have an anxiety disorder, sometimes little things bother me more than the big things. Not that this isn't big. But anyway, let me know in the comments if you can relate to any of this. And I hope you enjoyed my first ever wrap up. And tell me what you think of the books that I've discussed. Do you want to read any of them? Did you like any of them? Did you not like some of them? Please tell me in the comments, and please subscribe to my channel if you're so inclined, because I intend to, as much as I can, help out and be part of this community that I'm getting to really love so much. So like I said, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and you'll find out when I'm releasing more videos. And until then, until we meet again, aloha.